Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low Magazine yet? 4Low Magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, I have Josh Reynolds. Josh is a marketing partner with We Rock Events, especially for our Baghdad, Arizona event that we just finished this last weekend. It is his second Baghdad, Arizona event as the host with Flying High Off-Road. Josh took over Flying High last year, the beginning of the year, and has been running Flying High, and thought we'd interview him and say how he's doing and how he got to where he's at. So Josh, thank you so much for coming on board and being part of Conversations with Big Rich, and it'll be a fun event.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. I appreciate it.
So let's get started with the question I ask everyone. Where were you born and raised?
You know, I hate to admit it, but I was born in Southern California.
That's all right. Hey, as long as you've escaped, you're good.
That's right. No, I grew up in Southern California, in Anaheim. Most of my family's still there. And we moved to Arizona in 1996. So I've been here in Arizona for the last, call it 30 years.
Right. And in Anaheim, I guess that's where you got most of your school years done?
Yeah, I think I got here to Arizona in 6th grade. So
Okay.
Most of my, I'm not as old as everyone thinks I am. I'm only 43. I got a lot of gray hair, but
yeah, I have to admit, I thought you were a little closer to 50, but it's only because of the gray hair.
I get it a lot.
I was that way too. But you know, by the time I was your age, I was a lot closer to where I am now. So, what was it like growing up in Anaheim? Did you get to Disneyland a lot?
You know, that was a common thing back then. I mean, it was a better time, right? California was cool back then.
Yes.
It was the 80s, so, you know, there wasn't all the BS that they have in California now. But, you know, it was a cool upbringing. My parents are still together to this day. My younger brother and I were growing up, and, you know, just kids in California in the 80s, riding bikes, going to the beach, you know, getting home when the streetlights came on. That's how it used to be.
Excellent. Anaheim is, as far as I can remember, has always been pretty much suburbia. It's not rural like a lot of the outlying areas.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, it's you're in the middle of the city. My parents were big into hunting and fishing and camping, and so we got out every weekend. My dad had a Isuzu Trooper, and that was our 4-wheel drive. So we would bop all over the country, going to national parks and camping and being outdoors. And that was our first 4-wheel drive that we had.
So you grew up as an outdoor enthusiast?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And what is it about the outdoors that floats your boat?
You know, when I was young, just being out and about with my family was what I was into. And then when I went to college, my undergrad and grad school, I was at NAU, and I got really into climbing, and I actually became a mountain guide. So I moved to Alaska for several years as a mountain guide and climbed all over the country. And that's what I was doing for a long time as a professional guide, and skiing and climbing on some of the biggest mountains in the world. And that kind of led me to, just the adventure part of things. That's kind of how four-wheel drive and off-road started for me as well, is just looking for adventure, looking for something exciting to do. Once you have a family, you got to kind of settle down a little bit from the super extreme stuff, right? With age comes a cage kind of saying.
Right.
So once I got married and started having kids, and the extreme mountaineering that we were doing was kind of off the table. So that's when I started getting into the off-road stuff.
And when you were in school, what did you think you would be doing when you got out of school?
It's like you all hear from everybody, right? Like what I did in college has nothing to do with what I'm doing now, right?
Right.
It's kind of the same story. My undergrad was in recreational management, and I was actually running a water park for 10 years. So I was director of safety and security at a water park here in Phoenix. It used to be called Water World, and I did that for a decade. And I thought I was going to take over the position, the general manager position there, and actually went to Six Flags in New Jersey and was offered a position there to run the water park. For some reason, I turned that down. I didn't want to live in New Jersey.
Imagine that.
You
Sorry,
can't see
East
the
Coasters.
sky. Yeah, you can't see the sky. It's weird. But yeah, I turned that down, and then that's when I decided I was going to go to grad school, and moved up to Alaska and started guiding full time. And then I'd come back to NAU for school. I ended up getting my master's in business in 2007. And again, went back to Alaska and kept guiding, and just thought, it was something fun and adventurous to do. And then actually when I was writing my thesis for grad school, I reconnected with who's now my wife. And we got married and had kids, and that's kind of where that all went. But I was running my family's hot tub business for years.
Okay.
That we had grown up in. And at one point, my parents wanted to get out of it because they were semi-retired and wanted to be full-time retired. So we sold that business. And funny enough, the whole thing with the off-roading thing and flying high and racing that we've done for years all started with a Craigslist ad. I mean,
really?
It's kind of a funny story, yeah.
So let's hear that story.
So in 2011, this is back like the early days of Craigslist, right? Like it was big. I was looking for Jeep parts because I had been flipping Jeeps on the side, and just for extra money, and something that I enjoyed doing. And we've been wheeling forever, right? We have Cherokees and TJs and all kinds of stuff. And there was a Craigslist ad for the Baja 1000 2011 with Mag 7. And it said, "Do you want to come experience the Baja 1000?" And I'm thinking, hell yeah, who doesn't, right? And it was like, the ad was like, free trip to the Baja 1000. So bing, bang, boom, I jump on the computer, I sign me up. I signed 3 of my buddies up. I didn't even tell them. I called all of them and said, "Hey, we're going to the Baja 1000. And all 3 of them were like, "Cool, when?" So we went down there. We had an incredible time, like you always do at the 1000. All kinds of crazy things happened, like always do at the 1000. And on our way back, my good friend at the time said, "Hey, what do you think it would cost to buy a race car?" And I said, "Don't do it."
Right. The rest of your life, that's what it costs.
Exactly, right? Like it'll never end. So a week later, I was having drinks with some friends, and I said, "Man, I had such a great time at the Baja 1000. It would be so cool to keep doing that. Do you guys know anybody that has, a race car?" And Chris Doyle, who was working for Daystar at the time, said, "Yeah, my buddy Jeremy Hammer has an Ultra 4 car." And I had never met Jeremy at that point. And he said, "You should go down to his shop. It's called Flying High Off Road. and this was in 2011. And he said on Tuesday and Thursday nights, they work on race cars down there. Go down there, introduce yourself, and see what happens. So I come down, and I walk into a shop of people I'd never met before and said, hey, I'm Josh, and I want to, see what you guys are doing. And Jeremy's like a big giant teddy bear and the nicest guy in the world, and basically invites me in and says, we'd love to have you as part of our team. And we started racing together.
Wow. That's awesome.
So I was still running the hot tub business, but now we had a hobby. I was helping out Flying High Off-Road with a race team. So Jeremy and Sam and all the guys that were down here doing all this were building race cars, and they were going racing. And we did a lot of Ultra 4 for several years, and King of the Hammers, and the NORA races and all the stuff that we did over the years with UTVs and the pre-runners. And that was just a hobby. It was a hobby for years. Just something fun to do on the weekends and get out with all the guys. So that was really cool.
Okay, so before we go any deeper into nowadays, let's backtrack a little bit. Did you ever choke out Chris for recommending that you go to Flying High?
It's funny. This last off-road expo we were all at, he was there. And he walked up, and we're in the giant Flying High booth with all the pop-up and the banners and all the logoed up rigs and all the stuff that we have there. And he was like, dude, I can't believe that, 14 years ago, I told you about my buddy with a race car, and now you own that company.
Right. That's how that works sometimes.
Crazy stories. Yeah.
So let's go back to your beginning in driving. You were touring the country and going to national parks and camping and fishing and hunting and stuff with your dad in the Trooper. What was the first vehicle you got to drive?
It was that Trooper.
Okay.
And it was actually here in Arizona on Table Mesa Road, where we all know and love and go wheeling. I think I was 8 years old, and he said, do you want to drive? And I said, yeah. And I drove it right into a ditch. I can remember it. I drive past that same ditch all the time on the way to Little Pan staging area. I can remember that ditch that I drove into. And that Suzuki Trooper, I ended up crashing it years later. My dad let me drive it in high school, and I, was out in the desert in a storm or something, doing donuts or something dumb, and I drove it right into a tree and put a big giant dent in the side of it. But back then they had auto shop, so in high school I had auto shop.
Right.
So I brought it in, and everyone thought we were just, screwing around, but I was trying to fix the door because he said I had to take care of it and fix it. So, we were doing body work on it and painting it. And, that's where the initial love of cars came from. I didn't grow up with a bunch of cars. That wasn't like a thing in my family, but I went to auto shop at Deer Valley High School. And so much cool stuff I learned there. And then my first car I bought was a 1967 Mustang GT.
Nice.
I didn't know how to work on it. And I had to have a carburetor rebuilt, and the guy wanted like $400. And back then, that was what I made in a month. So I had to learn how to do it myself. And that's kind of where all the wrenching came from.
How many times did you have to take that carburetor on and off to get it to run right after you rebuilt it?
Probably a dozen. I mean, I did everything wrong you could do wrong, Rich. Back then you didn't have the internet.
Right.
So, you have like a Chilton manual and your dad's Craftsman toolbox in the garage. And
with a claw hammer and a...
Yeah, exactly. And an adjustable wrench, trying to keep the thing on the road as a kid. But, you didn't know any different.
Right.
Because you didn't have the internet and YouTube certified mechanics and all the stuff you have now telling you how to do this stuff. So the wheel would fall off every now and then because I'd put something on backwards or whatever. And,
my first vehicle, I've told the story a couple of times, is probably a lot actually, was a 54 Volkswagen Bug. And luckily my dad was a motorhead before that. He was a drag racer and then boats and everything was, performance. And so, the boat motor had multiple carburetors on it, 4 Carter 2 barrels. And
Nice.
so we'd always, it was after every season, before the next boating season, we'd tear into it and rebuild the carburetors and stuff. And then when I got my Bug, I started with a single Solex carburetor, so it was easier. And then went to twins, and a 2 barrel, and then twins. And so it was like, I got to learn progressively, how
Yeah.
to do it. And then I actually had a business for a while in the early days of my rock crawling, in the early 80s, rebuilding Rochester quadrajets for people on the trail, for their trail
Nice.
rigs and stuff, because I knew the trick to get them so that they wouldn't flood out on steep inclines or downhills. So
Yeah,
it worked out really well.
that's awesome.
So then after the Mustang, you got it, you kept it running and stuff. How long did you have that car for?
I still have it. It's sitting
Oh,
in the
wow.
parking lot at Flying High today.
There you go. Okay.
All the guys are drooling over it. I just brought it down here last week. Funny enough, to rebuild the carburetor.
You're
yeah, I
going to
still have it.
have a little class, a lesson with those guys, because they've probably never had a carburetor apart, most of your mechanics.
You're absolutely right, man. It's a lost art form, right? Like, these guys are all EFI and everything's fuel injected nowadays, and you got to have someone over 60 that knows how to work on a carburetor anymore.
Pretty much.
Yeah, they look at it like, what the heck is that thing?
Yeah, nowadays they just chase a wire.
Yeah, yeah. The scanner tells you which wire to chase and how to
Exactly.
change the injector. Yeah.
So what are the plans for the Mustang?
It's like the ultimate snowball, Rich. Like a rock crawler or a race car. I feel like if I tear into it, it'll never stop.
Right.
Well, I built that thing in 2000, and we put a new motor in it. We built a 351 Cleveland for it, and did a new trans, and did some suspension work and this, that, the other. I mean, that's 25 years ago, but the thing still has drum brakes, original steering. We basically restored it, but the paint job's 25 years old. So, going down that road, I'm going to want to do, okay, well, we disassembled the whole car to paint it, right?
So
And
steering.
Oh yeah, now we
brakes.
want to put a Mustang 2 in the front of it to make it drive nice, and then we
Right.
got to do disc brakes, and then we got to do Holley EFI.
Right.
Like, it's just gonna snowball, and I don't know that I want to mess with it. I kind of think I'm gonna leave it the way it's been, because just do something else if I'm gonna do all that.
Then don't even open the hood.
No, it's just leave it alone. It runs good, and it's a fun car to drive. I think I'm just gonna leave it alone. Just enjoy it on the weekends, kind of a thing. So, with the 8 different Jeeps I own down here at the shop and all the other stuff we have, I don't have a ton of time for the old Mustang.
Right. So let's talk about that, the acquiring of Jeeps, but early. So during the Mustang early
Yeah.
years, you had to get a Jeep at some point.
Had to.
When did that happen?
It's probably like most people's story starts, right, with an XJ. Back then, I picked up an '89 XJ for $1,000. It's probably a $10,000 Jeep these days. But I got an old XJ with some 31s on it, and that was a big tire back then. That to put 31s on an XJ, you had to do a 3-inch lift. So I did a little lift kit, and we put some 31s on it, and I built rock sliders for it in my driveway at my parents' house with an arc welder, and I built my own exoskeleton out of square tubing.
Oh God.
Oh yeah, we like pie cut it and like bent it back, and it was some redneck ingenuity for sure. But I never had more fun in a Jeep. I mean, every Jeep in the world I've owned at some point,
Right.
But I've never had more fun in a vehicle than I did that '89 XJ. It couldn't go up a hill without overheating. I couldn't get to Flagstaff without rebuilding the motor. But it was a freedom thing, right? You don't have to worry about scratching it. You don't care if you take it down a river, which I did several times in the Agua Fria. the parts for it were super cheap. It caught on fire at one point, and the insurance company totaled it out because it was the harness that burned. And there was a super cool old guy, and I wish I knew his name, but back then all we had was Arizona Virtual Jeep Club.
Right.
And you'd have to get on your dial-up AOL with the sounds and the beep 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 beep, and I'd get 9 minutes a time because you have to buy a prepaid card or whatever back then. And I would get on this Jeep Club, and I had posted that my Jeep had caught on fire and I was trying to fix it. And there was some old guy, an old veteran that was a electrical engineer from the military. And he came over and spent a whole Saturday with me and rewired my entire harness to make the Jeep run.
Wow. Nice.
And didn't ask for a penny, didn't do, coolest dude in the world. I like I said, maybe he's listening, but I owed that guy a lot because I drove that Jeep for 7 or 8 more years all through college.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
but that XJ was the most fun I ever had. Eventually ended up on 35s with an 8-inch lift, which was just ridiculous for an XJ,
Right.
But that thing would just go anywhere, and I hated it. And because every time I'd go out, it would break, right? And damn this old XJ. But it would always be, you could fix it with some baling wire and some duct tape, and it would always get you home. But it would always break a couple times on the trip, But it was great. I mean, I wish I had to this day. If I ever see it, it's around Phoenix somewhere. If I see it, I'm going to try to buy it back from them. But
square tube exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And all.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it had our names written on the hood of it with Sharpie. But in college through undergrad and grad school, it was great because we were in Flagstaff and it would snow all the time.
They're
So,
great in the snow.
They're fantastic. We'd get these huge storms. No one could get to work, so I would charge people to take them to work, and I could drive through all the snow banks and everything, and it would just cruise around, and the doors would freeze shut. And I couldn't open the rear hatch because the unibody was all twisted up. But I love that XJ.
Nice. And so what came after the XJ?
Oh, geez. Every other Jeep in the world, Rich. I had a CJ5. We lifted it so high that I couldn't take a corner without it lifting wheels off the ground. Then I had a couple of YJs, 2 or 3 TJs. Then I got a nice Rubicon LJ that we put a long arm kit on it. And I kept that for a long time, just because it's kind of the unicorn, right?
Yes.
And then once I had both my girls, my wife said, this is too small. You got a dog and a cooler and an LJ and 2 kids and trying to go camping or whatever. And she said, what about one of these 4-door Jeeps? I'm like, oh God, here we go.
Soccer dad.
They didn't have the best reputation back then. It was the mall crawler.
Right.
So I picked up, we were buying a lot of Jeeps at the auction, and I picked up a 12 JK 4-door for like 12 grand at the auction, and it had both the axles were damaged. So there was an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if we're going to put axles under it, this is what started. I said, well, I might as well get some Curry Rock Jock 60s with 35 splines and ARBs and all this, right? Like, if you're going to do it, buy once, cry once. So I told the wife, I said, hey, I'm going to build this thing once. I'm not going to do it again. And at that point, we'd built a bunch of Ultra 4 cars with Goodall, and we'd seen what worked and what didn't work. And I'm like, if we're going to do it once, let's just do it. So I ordered some wide axles from Curry and an Atlas and 1-ton drive shafts. And I'm like, we're going to build this thing to run 40s, and we're never going to have to do it again. I'm going to make it to where it's not going to break. I'm going to put an Ultra 4 car underneath this JK. So that's what we did, and we've been wheeling it for 10 years. And I'm going to knock on something real quick, but I've never had it break.
Right.
So that's what it's still one of the shop rigs that we have down here. But through all the flips and we probably built 60 LJs, definitely over 100 TJs. probably the 50 range of JKs and JLs. Now we're going to start doing a bunch of these Gladiators because the pricing is getting reasonable.
Right.
But yeah, we're still wheeling. I mean, we got the buggy too. You know, we got an old YJ buggy on tons that we take out and play with all the big boys and the crawlers. But yeah, that family rig to this day, we're still taking people out in.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Goodall.
Yep.
You started racing with Hammer, and how did the relationship with Goodall start?
Well, that was mostly your fault, Rich.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was back
I'm surprised
in, that
you
was
haven't
back
choked
in
me out yet.
No, that was the Dirt Riot days.
Okay.
So we had been racing with Hammer for a couple of years, and we did a couple of KOHs and a couple, Glen Helen and all this stuff, and then did some Dirt Riot races down in Tucson and the ones up in St. John's and all over, and I had invited my good friend Ken Goodall at the time to a Dirt Riot race. And same scenario, right? We went out, we had a great day, we're driving home, and he looks over and says, "What do you think it would cost to build a race car?"
The rest of your life.
And I said, "Don't do it." And you know how that story ends.
Yes.
So the next day, he calls me and says, "Hey, find me a car." And I said, again, "Don't do it." But he's insistent. And my buddy Lance had an old TJ rock crawler on 40s that was a rock crawler. It was not a race car. This was a TJ with a rock crawler long arm kit on it and an RCI aluminum fuel cell behind the seat. So we bought it for 12 grand and took it home and did, some basic prep and brought it out to a Dirt Riot race in Congress. And I think it was yellow then, Rich. And I think we made it a mile because that's how far we had to walk back. That RCI aluminum fuel cell that is the cheapest cell you can buy,
Right.
Split in half and dumped all the fuel out of it in the first mile.
Oh, geez.
And it was a rock crawler. It had an inch of up travel. So our backs were destroyed and we're like, what the hell were we thinking? Coming out here trying to play race car with a rock crawler. And, everyone, we got last place and all the real race cars, flew past us and we're sitting there watching them. So we loaded back on the trailer and we're driving home and guess what he leans over and says? "What do you think it would cost to buy a real race car?"
Don't do it.
Don't do it, right? So 2 months later, I get a phone call. I'm at a wedding. I'm in a tuxedo, and I'm at a wedding at the Buttes. And Ken calls and says, "I'm out front. I got a truck and a trailer. We're driving to Texas." And I said, "Okay, well, as soon as I'm done, I'll come out." And, it's a wedding, and we've been drinking a lot. And probably 1 o'clock in the morning, I walk outside, and there he is sitting in the truck with a trailer with his son, Logan, who was, God, back then, Logan was probably 8,
Right.
And he was in the truck, and he said, "You ready?" I'm like, what's going on? He's like, "We're driving to Texas, to San Antonio. There's a guy that has a Jimmy's chassis Ultra 4 car. And I've been talking to him, and he'll sell it for this much money. And, it doesn't need anything." This is the used race car story, right?
Right. Oh, it's race prepped.
Right. We've all seen how that goes. It's race ready. It's ready to go. So this is right when we didn't know anything about Ultra 4 except for Jeremy's stuff.
Right.
We didn't know that much about it. So we drive out there and we jump in this car, and it's a 20-something hour drive, and this thing's bitching, right? It's got an LS motor. It's got 40s. It's a tube chassis. We rip it around, and he's like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "Compared to that damn TJ, this is a rocket ship." So we didn't even know it at the time, but we were driving it in low range because we didn't know anything about an Atlas or how it shifted. So we thought it was a rocket ship in low range. So we get the car, we bring it back. Of course, we get 4 flat tires on the way home and have to stay in some town in New Mexico for a day, and all the normal race car stories. And we get it home and we called you guys and said, hey, we got this car. We want to race it at a dirt riot. And there was a dirt riot like a week later, so we couldn't get it done. But the Ultra 4 Nationals were in Wickenburg that year. I think it was it Thompson Ranch?
No, that was up at that was at Pingatori's.
Okay.
Yep.
So the Ultra 4 Nationals was that year. So they told us that we had to race in that race. And we didn't understand why. Well, it turns out the reason the guy was selling the car, Ultra 4 came out with new rules about 1.5 inch chassis. We didn't know anything about that. So Alan, what's his last name? Alan Johnson said, you have to race in the Ultra 4 Nationals and get the car banded to be grandfathered in to ever race that car again. Because we didn't realize the reason the guy was selling the car was because it was an 1.5 inch car, and Ultra 4 just said no more 1.5 inch cars that weigh over whatever the weight was.
Right, everything.
So the car wasn't.
2. Yep.
Had to go to 2, right? Well, we didn't know that, and it was a lot of money to buy that car, so we had to race it. We had a couple of weeks to get the thing together, but of course we couldn't race it as it was. We had to put bypass shocks on it. We had to do this and that and all this crazy stuff. But that was our first Ultra 4 race, was at that Nationals. And they still make fun of me to this day about that race. So of course we did all this fancy stuff to put bypasses on it and this, that, the other. The alternator didn't work. We didn't know it. So we had stolen an alternator off a Buick out there and clocked it differently to put it on, because after pre-running the battery died. Well, I didn't know that much about building alternators at the time, so we thought it was working. Turns out it wasn't working. We had every battery out of everybody's diesels out there. We had 8 batteries, and we'd come into the pit and we would change the battery. And then I'd take a battery in my lap, because I was co-driving and Ken was driving. And we'd go out and do the next lap, and halfway through the car would die, and I'd get out and put a new battery in it. And Jeremy and Sam were racing in his Ultra 4, and all the other guys that we knew that were out there. And I had put the triangles out behind the car. You know, like you have to take these triangles with you as part of the tech stuff, right?
Right.
Well, it was my first Ultra 4 race. So I put the triangles out, thinking that's what people did. So everyone's laughing at me, making fun of me afterwards. You put your triangles out at the race. No one really does that. It's just for tech stuff.
Right.
So every time I'm changing a battery, I'm walking down the course 100 yards, putting out all these triangles.
Making it really speedy.
Yeah, right. So we finished like a lap and a half of the whole race, but we had a great time. And, obviously everyone caught the bug, because Ken ended up buying a half dozen Ultra 4 cars over the years. And we raced for 12 years in total with Jeremy and Goodall, and had great times and traveled all over the world. And I had, at one point, that's how we kind of started our Jeep business. Ken and I actually were partners for a while, at the Goodall shop, building Jeeps and stuff, and rock crawlers and race cars. And they kind of got out of it, which was a blessing in disguise, because when I left that building, I called Jeremy and said, hey, I got to move out, of the Goodall shop. They're not doing race car stuff anymore. And he said, well, why don't you come down and take over half of Flying High and run your business out of here? Because I don't have that much going on. And, I'd love to have you pay half the rent. And that was the biggest blessing you could imagine, because we were here for about 6 months, running scavengers off road out of the Flying High building. And he said, man, you guys are killing it. Why don't you just, take over the whole thing? Right. And that's how we ended up where we're at.
And that was after the Jeremy, the Flying High had the remodel.
Yeah, Jeremy did the garage rehab in 2019, which was super cool. And it's amazing that even worked out. I had been watching the Discovery Channel and was watching this show that called Garage Rehab. And I turned off the TV and I sent Jeremy a text with a link that said, if you don't do this, you're an idiot. And next thing you know, he's talking to the producers and he's got interviews scheduled and this whole big thing. And he's like, dude, this might actually happen. So sure enough, Flying High Off-Road got chosen for the garage rehab show, and Richard Rollins and all them came down during Barrett Jackson, January. And coolest thing that ever happened to Flying High is they gutted this entire place after 40 years in business and redid the entire shop. And it was absolutely immaculate. And they put in new equipment and new floor and painted the place and remodeled the showroom and did all this awesome work to the shop. And Jeremy came back into a whole new business, which was so cool for them.
Right.
And we still get people that call, are you guys the guys from the garage rehab show? You know? And we still get those phone calls to this day.
Awesome.
But it was such a cool show. Unfortunately, it's not on anymore. But they did such great work and they had such cool sponsors. And it was funny when it was all said and done and all the cameras were gone and, you know, all the demolition was done. And everyone got to take a breath. You know, Jeremy sat down, nothing worked.
Right.
It was like, well, shit, the internet doesn't work.
The cameras and
and my phone's disconnected. You know, they were so concerned about the visual part of things, right? Because that's what you see on the show.
Yep.
So there was like a good week where Jeremy's running around trying to run the business from his cell phone and from a laptop because they didn't really hook anything up.
Right.
So yeah, it was kind of funny. But yeah, it was a blessing for sure that they did all that work. And they really took it, the shop at least, because, you know, this place was built in 1980.
Right.
It's the oldest shop in Arizona. And at the time it looked it, you know,
It did. Yes.
it had, you were there a lot. You remember how it looked, you know, it had the old in-floor lifts with the hydraulic rams down on the floor and
that
only
leaked
half
or didn't work
worked.
at all. Yep.
Yeah. One side went up and the other didn't. And, you know, so they brought in a bunch of bend pack lifts and we've added 2 more since then. And we've added some additional bass since we took over and did our own remodel. But yeah, I mean, they just did such a phenomenal job of building the shop for what we do. You know, it's different to build a shop for automotive stuff than it is for rock crawlers and lifted Jeeps and big giant trucks, you know. Right. And they really did a good job of understanding what we do. And there was some growing pains for sure, because initially the stuff they brought in had nothing to do with our business model. It was like, hey, here's an exhaust tubing bender. And we're like, well, we don't do exhaust work. We need a tubing bender. We build roll cages, you know? So it was cool though. They really did a nice job of setting the shop up for what we do, and big lifts and big equipment. You know, our tire machine will do 42-inch tires. Nice. Most won't do stuff like that.
Correct.
So it was really cool. And Jeremy and all his guys at the time, I was around because I could be here during the event, but he wasn't allowed to be here because they kick all the employees and the owner out during the remodel, and you can't come back till the end.
Right.
So he was calling me every day. What are they doing? What are they doing? Send me some pictures. You know, I'm like, no, you can't see it. It's a surprise, you know. But it was so cool. They did a big parade at the end, and everybody drove in with all the race cars and rock crawlers, and had a big party at the end of it. And it was just a really cool event.
Right. Jeremy really, you know, he really enjoyed that happened, and it was a good thing for Flying High. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. And you know, my hat's off to Jeremy. He's such a great guy. Everybody that knows him would say the same thing. And, you know, there was a lot of years that he owned this place, 17 years, where there were some hard years. And my hat's off to him for keeping it afloat and keeping the name going. I'm super blessed in that, you know, when we took this over, we're in a booming economy. And I don't have a parking space in the lot here or the one next door.
Right.
To get a Jeep worked on. As you know, we just had your Raptor here yesterday.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's the sport is really growing, and minus the problems that Stellantis and Jeep are having right now, the stuff they're pumping out with these new Jeeps are just amazing. We have a bunch of customers that come in here with brand new Jeeps and they want to do all this stuff to them. And these things are rolling off the lot with a 35-inch tire, and factory lockers and 456s and all this. It's amazing what you can buy out of the box and how capable it is these days.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And you were talking about from the TJ, LJ, and then all of a sudden, we get the JK, the 4-door soccer mom UTV or utility vehicle, SUV style Jeep. But that they really did save our industry at that point, because we were in the recession, or in some parts of the country, depression, and things were rough, especially if you were a contractor or in anything to do with the trades, because of the housing market had taken such a dump, that all the people that have the disposable income that spend it on outdoor activities and going boating or jeeping or camping or hunting, all of a sudden that was the part of the market that suffered.
Yep.
Well, Jeep comes out with the JK, and all of a sudden, these suburbanite moms are like, I got to have me one of these. They're so cute.
Yep.
And of course the husbands were like, well, yeah, that's kind of more manly than a minivan. So yeah, let's do that. And then the people that survived, the companies that survived that 2007, 8, 9, and 10, jumped all over at the aftermarket and started creating, all the aftermarket parts. Plus, Jeep did a great thing in making available all the blueprints. Yep. So you could design aftermarket parts without even having a vehicle in the shop. I mean, you test, you got to get that test fitting done and make sure that, it's actually going to work from paper to the right process. And, actually going to work. Engineered plans are great, but, engineers are not always, like whoever that engineer was that put the motor starter underneath the intake manifold, that guy I'd like to punch in the face.
Yeah, and that Cadillac motor, that's the best one.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The 4-door JK reinvented the whole thing, because you could take your family out for the weekend.
Right. You didn't have to, have multiple cars.
Yep.
And so you got into your Scavengers 4x4 was a means to an end for you. It started off as a kind of a hobby, flipping Jeeps, and then became pretty much your business. I know I get to sit in your one of your hot tubs out here at the Hammer's house. They still have one, and I think Shelly and I use it more than Jeremy and Trish do. But every time we're in town, we're in that hot tub.
Yeah, so, it's pretty cool how it's all changed over the years. I mean, again, like you talk about the things you went to school for, you don't end up necessarily doing, but yeah, I mean, we go from hot tubs to Scavengers off-road, building and flipping Jeeps. And we didn't really have a retail business in that environment. That was just, we gained some customers here and there from people knowing us, but we didn't advertise. We didn't have a storefront. We had a one bay shop,
right?
That we were doing these flips in, and it just grew big enough to where all of a sudden we had a couple employees, and then when Scavengers Off-Road moved down here to Flying High, there was this huge potential for space. This is a big property. We got 2.5 acres down here to do all the things we wanted to do. So it was just the right place at the right time. And, Jeremy has this great new venture that he's doing with his wife, and they're getting to spend all this time together and travel together. So that was a blessing for them.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to see the cycle, right? Jeremy had this business, and he grew this business with his daughters. And he has 2 little girls, and Sam had 2 little girls, and now they're all kind of grown up and they're going to do their own thing. And now I have 2 little girls that are growing up in this off-road business with the Jeeps and the race cars and all this kind of stuff. And it's cool to see the same thing happening over and over.
Right. So I have to ask, how did you acquire Bob?
That's a good question. So it's kind of the same story as the racing thing. Bob's my right-hand guy. And the crazy thing is he's not an employee.
Right.
Back when we first started the race thing with Goodall, we started with 1 race car. Then there's 2 race cars. Then there's 5 race cars. Now we got a bunch of UTVs and we're racing all these different classes. 1 KOH, we took 9 cars.
Right.
The King of the Hammers, which was insane. So at that time, as the co-driver, I was in charge of building the race team. So same kind of scenario. I was posting Craigslist ads that said, hey, you want to go racing? Who wants a hobby? Come play with cool race cars. We'll go around, we'll have a good time. And Bob and actually Dave Oliver, who ended up racing with us for years, and to this day, we just did Nora with last year. Dave and Bob both showed up from a Craigslist ad. They joined the race team. Bob ended up running a lot of the logistics and stuff for the race team. And Dave ended up wanting to drive and bought a bunch of Ultra 4 cars over the years. So literally the whole thing started from Craigslist. And Bob's been with us for over 10 years at this point. We built him an office here at the shop, and he takes care of things when I'm not around, but he has a day job. He works in medical billing, and he just does his thing while he's down here. And same kind of thing, gets to hang out and play with cool race cars and go on all these trips and help us plan and build this business. But I couldn't do it without him. I mean, he is the best investment ever, especially since he's not getting paid.
Yeah, he's a free investment. That's awesome.
But like I said, I couldn't do it without him. He was there at the We Rock this weekend with me the entire time, helping out with everything he can. He does all the trail rides with us. So we take all these customers out and helps out. He's got a really nice built Jeep. We always give him a hard time because he always says, I don't get anything for free. I don't get anything for free. But every time there's a vendor or someone here, he's always like, oh yeah, you got some new race line wheels, or you got some new dirty lights or something coming out. We can put them on my rig,
Right.
So he gets to test the new parts. We let him test a lot of new parts.
There you go.
So.
Perfect. So let's talk about your primary business, or what kind of work you do at Flying High.
Yep. So 90% of what we do is Jeeps. We have a 1956 here up to a 2024, and everything in between. So if it's a Jeep, we work on it. We do a lot of, lift kits, wheels and tires, bumpers, lights, winches. We're doing a lot of 1-ton swaps for crate axles and building axles. We're doing gears, drive shafts, the whole part of the Jeep. We're also doing a lot of swaps lately. We've been doing a lot of LS swaps on the early JK that had that 3.8 liter motor. Right. That didn't have any power. So we're doing a lot of LS swaps. We're also putting 4.0s out of the late model Jeeps, the 05, 06 TJs in older CJs.
Okay.
So we have 3 or 4 that are here that are older CJ7s that have that 4.2 and the 3-speed in them.
Yeah, that 350 or 258 or whatever it is.
Yep, the 258. And we're putting a modern 4.0 with a 6-speed trans in it, with a hydraulic clutch, and the drivability is just so much nicer. It's fuel injected. It runs great. It's got more power. You got a high end on the freeway. So there's a lot that's going on down here. Plus we do the normal, we build some rock crawlers and do 4-links and all the fun stuff. But then, there's still a part of our business that is big trucks. We do the big 10-inch McGawi's lift kits, and, someone buys a new Denali and they bring it in and they want 37s on it. And we do the nice wheels and tires and amp steps and the big kits. So there's a lot of big trucks that happen. It's not as much as the Jeep world is right now.
Right.
And that just may be because that's kind of what we're marketing towards. You know, we sponsor a lot of the local Arizona Jeep groups, and we go on all these trail rides and we put on these Jeep events. So, you know, our expertise is in Jeeps more than it is necessarily in giant trucks. So while Flying High is kind of, you know, known for the giant truck scene, there's not nearly as much of that going on these days as there are people wanting to go out weekend wheeling in their Jeep.
Very true.
So, like, I know Eric, who's my general manager and kind of runs the front office here, he counted yesterday. We had 42 Jeeps on the property.
Wow.
So and the great thing about Jeeps, Rich, is, as you know, it's not someone's daily driver, usually.
True.
Right? So for us as a business, it's fantastic in that you don't need it back tomorrow because you don't have to drive it to work.
Right. I did.
Well, some people have to, but there's a lot of them that are second, third vehicles to where, hey, when I'm booked out 2.5 weeks like we are right now, they can wait.
And they don't mind.
I'm not in a hurry. Yeah, I'm not in a hurry. Plus, you know, I want these specific parts and I want to do all these cool things. Well, some of those things have a lead time and they're built to order. So it takes me a week to get all those things. And we have a ton of parts in stock here. I mean, I could build several Jeeps just from our inventory. But, you know, everyone wants something specific.
Right.
So you got to get that stuff here, and then we got to get it into the shop. And, you know, now we have 6 bays. We put in an entirely new bay with a 15,000-pound lift on it this year to do the big trucks. And these Gladiators are getting big too. When we're putting 40s on them and 1-ton axles and all this, they're getting heavy. So yeah, we got a lot of Jeeps down here, and it's great that our customers aren't needing it back tomorrow. You know,
right.
So
they're willing to wait.
Yeah, they're willing to wait for quality work and expertise. And we're a Jeep specialist, and that's what we do. Now, yeah, we build hot rods here and there for customers, and we'll do big lift kits on big trucks. And, you know, you buy a new Tahoe or Suburban and you want to lift it, of course we do those things. But our bread and butter really is the Jeep market.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And sounds good. I mean, do you have any future plans in the works for the property or for the business itself?
You know, we do. We've been talking to contractors about an expansion to the building because, again, I got 8 techs down here and only 6 bays. So I'd like to have 2 or 3 more bays. So we're looking at how to accomplish that on the west side of our property to expand the building.
Right.
So that's kind of in the works. We brought in 4 different shipping containers, the 40-footers, just for storage. You know, because we have all these vehicles that are either a race car or a race UTV or a rock crawler that, you know, don't necessarily need a key to start it.
So you don't want to leave them in the yard.
Yeah, you don't want to leave them in the yard. I mean, we have a fenced yard with security and cameras and all this stuff, but, you know, you don't want to risk something.
Right.
Luckily, we've never had a problem down here. So, but we also have some great neighbors that are around us that keep an eye on things for us. But one of the things they did during the garage rehab was they put in a phenomenal security system. So we have like 16 cameras all over the property. So yeah, we've luckily never had any crime issues, but
good.
But yeah, you know, we're going to expand a little bit. We don't want to do anything crazy. I don't have any desire to open more locations.
That's probably smart.
Yeah, I think with our business model, I mean, I have people, now that we're in Central Phoenix, I have people from all over the state that will drive here. So if your customer will come to you, there's no reason really to go to them.
Right, because you guys are, you know, basically at the intersection of the 17 and the 10.
Yeah, we're right in the very middle of Phoenix. So that's one great thing about our location. You know, when we were in North Phoenix at the Goodall shop, we would get North Phoenix customers.
Right.
Right. When you're in the center of Phoenix, I got people coming from way East Valley, way West Valley, Tucson. I mean, all over because we're centralized. So while it's not the best part of town. It is a fantastic location.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with like you said, with the gated property and the security